Onde tem cultura, a Vale está. No poder criativo que nasce dos palcos, orquestras, das artes, das ruas e dos museus. Na valorização das diversas identidades brasileiras e na preservação de memórias. É valorizando a cultura que crescemos e evoluímos juntos. Instituto Cultural Vale.
A inteligência artificial não consegue definir em uma imagem do que vão ser feitos os próximos 100 anos. Porque o futuro não vai ser feito de uma imagem só. Vai ser feito dos que dizem sim, de quem não aceita um não como resposta e de quem pergunta, por que não? O futuro será feito de você, que assim como o Itaú, é feito de futuro.
Ministério da Cultura e a Associação Casa Azul apresentam 22ª Flip, Festa Literária Internacional de Paraty. A Flip conta com o benefício da Lei Federal de Incentivo à Cultura, PRONAC 235060, e possui acessibilidade para pessoas com deficiências física, visual e auditiva. Tem patrocínio Master, Instituto Cultural Vale. Patrocínio Ouro, Itaú, CCR e Suzano. Patrocínio Prata, MAC Móveis. Eletronuclear, O Globo e Sesc. Patrocínio Bronze, Sebrae e Globo Livros. Parceria institucional, Prefeitura de Paraty, Secretaria Estadual de Turismo do Rio de Janeiro e Museu do Território. É uma concepção Associação Casa Azul. Realização, Ministério da Cultura, Governo Federal, Brasil, União e Reconstrução. Obrigada e boa mesa. Flip, o encontro da literatura com a cidade.
O casarão foi feito dinheiro, uma ruína, e aí nós começamos a restaurar esse casarão. E depois esse lugar virou um ícone da noite, onde pessoas de todos os níveis sociais frequentavam, toda essa gama de pessoas do mundo inteiro, e os caiçaras se encontravam. Tinha uma relação muito grande, né, com os caiçaras e as pessoas do mundo inteiro. Enfim, aquilo ali virava assim uma coisa surreal, no meio do nada, entendeu? Acontecia. As pessoas sabiam que ali tinha um lugar aberto, que ali poderiam se divertir, encontrar pessoas. sempre gostei da dança, era um lugar de dança também, o bar. As pessoas dançavam no balcão, pô. Essa arte da rua, do cotidiano que acontecia ali dentro também. Isso era muito bacana, né?
Flip, o encontro da literatura com a cidade.
Of Emotions, Ilaria Gaspari and Marcela Dantés. Good afternoon. We will start now our fourth roundtable. It's called The Secret Life of Emotions. But first, I would like to say two things. First, this morning, we had the Nobel literature, and it was Hong Kong Hwan. She's a Korean writer. She came to Flip in 2021, the Flip that we did virtually. But it's such a pleasure to have Hong Kong being one of our authors and coming to Flip. She wrote Vegetarians and the White Book, Livro Branco, so get to know her. And also we are here for this roundtable with the Italian philosopher Ilaria Gaspari and with the writer from the state of Minas, Marcela Dantés. We decided to bring these two together because Marcela Dantés is someone who uses her emotions to tell stories. And Ilaria will tell stories to talk about emotions. So this is why we brought the two of them together. It's an interesting mixture. I would like to invite Natalia Timerman. She was also participated as an author here at Flip previously. She's a psychiatrist and she has an amazing work. And she's also an amazing writer. Her two most recent books are Copo Vazio, Empty Glass, in a free translation, and Slight Chances. Natalia, please, you have the floor.
Boa tarde.
Good afternoon. I would like to invite Marcela Dantés and Ilaria Gaspari to join me here on stage. So I would like to start by thanking you all for being here. And also I'd like to thank Ana Lima Cecília for having invited me for this wonderful Flip to mediate a meeting between these two inspiring authors. And this 22nd Flip, paying tribute to João do Rio, an essayist on Rio and contradictions, and human emotions are very contradictory. And this is also a meeting that will reflect other meetings that have to do with many of my interests, such as literature and philosophy, between the psyche and the world, between feelings and words. Each one of them will manage these meetings in different ways. Ilaria will talk about philosophy and emotions into literature, and Marcela Dantés from literature reaching the emotions. Both were born in 1986, and they are prolific writers with less than 30 years of age. Both have published many books. Ilaria was born in Milan, and today she lives in Rome with her husband and her dog. She is graduated in philosophy by the Higher Studies School of Pisa, the same one where study Lenou, the Elena Ferrante's character, and also she has a PhD in Paris 1 Sorbonne. She not only writes, but she teaches philosophy, literary work, and she presents philosophy, and she has a Sunday program on the radio on philosophy. Of her 5 books published in Brazil, they were all published by ENE Publishing House, Lições de Felicidade, Lessons on Happiness, with the translation by Cesare Tridapidi. It is a mix between a novel and an essay where a recently separated woman will move from home and decides to experiment living 1 a week according the understanding of each one of the school of philosophies of ancient Greece. It's a very different book and beautiful. The Secret Life of Emotions was launched in 2022 in Brazil with the translation of Letícia May. And this is a book in which, based on the philosophy and personal experiences, with a very careful literary work, she will examine nostalgia, regret, jealousy, among many other things. In 2024, she's launching both in Italy as well as in Brazil the novel The Reputation, A Reputação, translated by Cláudia Tavares Alves, a narrative about how your daily life can be disturbed in a boutique when a certain gossip starts to go around. She's so versatile that she brings together fashion and philosophy, and she ends up talking about deep reflections on life and contemporaneity. Marcela Dantés lives and was raised in Belo Horizonte. She has done social communication. She works as a reviewer. And today she's a civil servant, and she also teaches writing. Her first book was on normal people, sobre pessoas normais, published by Patois. And she was already shortlisted for the Oceanos Award with Nem Sinal de Asas, a very moving novel about a woman who lives and dies alone, also published by Patois. She was shortlisted for Jabuti and São Paulo Awards. And João Maria Matilde was published by Autêntica. It was written in a literary residency in Óbidos in Portugal. Talks about the trip of a daughter trying to find out her father, and also at the same time she learns that he is dead. And Vento Vazio, Empty Wind in a free translation, is narrated in 4 voices and 4 types of going crazy about the disturbing aspects and facts that happen in a small town where a wind power is being built, and everything will be at the Flip bookstore. The experiences to find surprise. Her wit can be seen in sentences such as strange things happen when time goes by. And it's amazing how she's able to go between different storytelling, built carefully, with specificity, with beauty and shadows. The accuracy of Ilaria's writing will make accessible the most horrible and difficult concept of philosophy. In Vida Secreta das Emoções, The Secret Life of Emotions, it has a lot to do about this meeting and Flip, where the possibility of philosophy grows, allows us to decipher ourselves. And then you have literature blossoming, giving us the necessary tools to understand ourselves as human beings. That is, we are subjects that are aware of our restricted time, and we know our limit. We don't know our limits. We are unique, and we are at the same time unique and similar to others. We have different paths that are difficult, and we can maybe have the possibility of saying me to be able to think about we, to open ourselves to the world. So I would like to start by bringing together, or maybe thinking about the 2 launches, the 2 more recent books, because these are such different books, such as Vento Vazio and A Reputação. The voices in the harshness of Vento Vazio will contrast in every way with the routine of the air-conditioned boutique where Barbara works, surrounded by brand high-class clothing in a room. Your ability to create worlds will allow us to have consistent scenarios and backdrops, and this is something that brings you together. You create amazing psychic words. So if you could maybe, starting with Marcela, if you could maybe let us know how your education contributed to that, and maybe talk about how you write. I guess this is one way of people getting to know you, and if these other professional activities interfere in the relation you have with writing.
Okay, first of all, good afternoon. I'm extremely happy to be here to see this auditorium full, and especially sharing this stage with these 2 wonderful women. So I want to thank Anna for the invitation. It's an honor to be here. Natalia, I believe that for me, literature is precisely to build psychological worlds, sometimes more than the narrative itself. I believe a lot in the power of characters, complex characters, contradictory characters, sometimes strange, improbable, unlikely, even disgusting. So my creative process involves thinking these characters. I take a long time to open up a new file. It's called the new book doc. I take a lot of time conceiving, designing, investigating what humanity has that can feed a narrative in these characters. And all of this begins with my curiosity, my great curiosity. It's not exclusive to me. I think writers in general have to have a hunger for others, curiosity, investigative curiosity. So I'm a person who pays close attention to eavesdropping on other people's conversations. I listen to conversation, eavesdrop on conversation in the buses. I even miss my stop sometimes. That's where my books come from. And it's this construction of a world, and I believe that this place of investigation of people's psyche. I come from advertising, the advertising world myself, and advertising, although it's considered it's a creative place, it's full of rules as well. 13 words on a billboard, you have 30 seconds to create a radio spot which is going to give the message of that company. It's the best company in the world. So I think that my professional experience helped me to see what I did not want. I needed to have the freedom, and I needed to have the possibility of going beyond in the building and crafting my characters. Of course, having a routine, another job. I'm a public employee, and I work with an office with partitions, beige colored. It's a rich place to find characters. Things weird happen in the offices, and they're useful for literature. That's amazing. And you, Ilaria, what about your background? How did it contribute to the creation of these psychological worlds? And about the routine of writing, how does one thing interfere in the other?
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you all. It's such a pleasure to be here today at Flip. It's such an honor, and I'm really moved to be here. I thank you all. And thank you so much to all of those who made it possible for me to be here. So talking about emotions, it is a huge emotion to be here with you, sharing the stage with these two amazing authors, and of course to be with all of you here in the audience. And so what is strange, Natalia, you interviewed me in a beautiful way, so we already met online, and I would have loved to do the work that you do. I wanted to be a psychoanalyst, not a psychiatrist, but a psychoanalyst. But I was always fascinated by the emotions of people, maybe because I'm a very emotional person. And since I was a kid, I grew with a strong emotional relation to the books I read. So I made this alternative choice. You know, my parents raised us without any type of television, and at the time where TV were important for kids. So instead of this life that would make children ready to share their experiences, I, on the other hand, would have books as my safe haven. And I developed a very strong sensation of proximity with other people's emotions, of listening to what have to say, because this allowed me to feel protected, both in terms of what I read in books and what I would observe in people. And when I grew and when I decided to choose what to study, I decided to do philosophy because I thought it would give me a structure, a method, and also because I didn't have the courage enough to choose the path that would allow me to become a psychiatrist. So I thought maybe, channeling my interest in psychology in observation and study. And my PhD dissertation and all those before it have to do with that. We're in a certain way dedicated to, for instance, what Spinoza did in the 17th century when this was unheard of. And it was an extraordinary discovery. He starts thinking about what we call today emotions. And at the time, they didn't have even the dignity of being called something like emotions. They were considered just a way of being in the world, which in a certain way would be the body following the psyche and serving the psyche. And then Spinoza, will see that there is a way of being free in your emotional life. So in these philosophy studies, I was able to do something that I didn't dare to do, it is to become a psychoanalyst. And they brought me into a path that, while I studied, would just enrich my whole idea of trying to invent characters, to give a voice to what I was studying. And this is how I started writing. My first book, which was not translated in Brazil, is a novel in which I give a psychological voice to all my characters. And then I wrote the other two books that were translated. And then these were two paths that were once again talking to one another. So this tendency of inventing psychic worlds has to do with the fact that sometimes I'm always afraid of life, and on the other hand, I'm always very curious about life. So to me, to invent things has to do with creating a protected space of safe haven to try to understand things. And this is where my two types of work come together. With regards to my writing routine, it's horrible. I have a horrible relation with time. I lose a lot of time working on certain things. Today, I was talking to Lisa Ginsburg, and curiosity is a beautiful thing, but it takes all our time. So I'm not a good example of this. I have to write, but I lose a lot of time, with curiosity, to give me the necessary time where time will be dilated, the time to writing with a strong idea of having to conclude. I'm very fast in a little time, and to use that time for writing, I lose a lot of time. I miss a lot of time. Such a pleasure to hear both of you. Both in Sinal de Asas by Marcela, as well as in A Reputação by Ilaria, they came from, news, from newspapers. In the case of Ilaria, news that became a book. How does this or these articles or this news influence you? Do you remember the time? How does a fact become fiction? And then maybe a broader question: where do your books come from? Maybe start with Ilaria. Well, I remember very well the moment where I saw that news. I read it, the news that became a book. And it was an example of how my books come to be. I'm curious to hear Marcela, too, and to know how the books are born for you, Natalia, because to me, it's as if they were these very moments of your daily life, and all of a sudden, a hole opens in front of us. I have the feeling that there's something I need to better understand here at that specific moment. And I see this because I feel a very strong emotion when this happens, and intolerance for my tendency of, losing time. And since I'm a very distracted person, I have many ideas that accumulate, and then I feel distracted. And then the actual idea comes to be this idea that I truly feel, and this is something that will become a book. And it's as if things are messed up by the strength that this urgency is revealed to me to start. I need to work on that idea. And then I have different things I have to do in my life, and I suffer with my time management. I suffer because I'm unable to dedicate myself. And then I know that will become a book. My husband, who is a book lover, even more so, our house is exploding. We have no room for more books. But he bought this book about metropolitan urban legends. And he was reading this book on urban legends, and he said, well, I found this idea for your next book, because he knows me very well. And he always writes saying, oh, this is a good idea for your next book. So there's a story that then was reconstructed, and I had that sparkle of an idea when I found the second book, which was the book by Edgar Morin. He did this research, and in 1969 in Orléans in France, after fake news was disclosed. But that sparkle gave my husband the idea of my next book. He said, I found an urban legend that is good for you. This fact that they say that ladies or girls were kidnapped in the backstage. And so I wanted to talk about this as a language. When she said there was this urban legend about girls kidnapped in changing rooms. So I thought that would be my story. And then it took me 1 year to start actually writing, because, of course, I didn't manage time correctly.
Great. I think that the books are born from our obsessions. Actually, for me, it's always an obsession, very similar to what Ilaria just said, that takes hold of me and occupies all my time. I remember exactly the day that I read the news that gave rise to No Sign of Wings. It was 2007 from El País, the newspaper, and the journalist did a very Silvia Pontevedra, the journalist, she did a story on a woman who was Maria do Rosario, who in Spain died, and it took 5 years for them to find her body in her apartment. And I remember reading that news story, and I was totally obsessed by the story to attempt to understand the paths that a person takes to reach this absolute loneliness, solitude, total solitude, no family, friends, neighbors, nobody. Oh, co-workers, she only discovered when her bills, which piled up, when the money ran out, and so the light utility company investigated to determine what was happening. I remember reading that, and it was curious because when she was very lonely, we don't have her prior history. All we have is her story of her death, but nobody knows who that woman was. And the hand, my writer's hand begins to itch, and I began to tell the story to justify that. I remember researching, it was not a single case. There's several different people who died in the same situations, and it took years for their bodies to be found, and that's where Anja Santiago was born. So she's a fictional character because her prior life story was built and crafted. There was important decisions to justify this loneliness. What were the paths? And it's something that began in her childhood. After her birth, she had a very complex relationship with her mother, rejected by her mother. There's a racial issue as well involved, and her entire life was this accumulation of rejections and attempts to hide, to disappear from the world. So I had an important exchange with Silvia, the journalist. I searched her out. I'm going to write a book about it. She was amazing because she went back to the town where that had happened. It was in a village in Spain, talked again with the neighbors, gave me a lot of information, practical tips, because I thought myself, my God, what happened with her car? And Silvia sent me a photograph of her automobile with dust, 5 centimeters of dust on the car. It appeared like it was normal to everybody, to the neighbors. It was an important exchange with Silvia, the journalist. It was a similar process to that of Ilaria, of this urgency. I was working in João Maria, my children, but I dropped that book because I had to write this other story. It was at a time during the pandemic, and I think this had something to do with Anja is confined in an apartment, and everything flowed in that direction. It's curious because after this book was released, people began to send me news, unusual, weird news, and they said, you can do whatever you want with these stories. So I have a file full of news about dead people that were found years later in their houses. So I have several parts for Empty Wind, which is my most recent novel. One news story, Marcela Dantés, who's a great writer and a friend of mine, he sent me a news story that happened in Maceió, in the outskirts of Maceió in northeast Brazil. 2 elderly women who were digging around their house with a trowel, a stonemason's trowel. It was as if it were a swimming pool and a house sprouting. They were digging with stonemasons, bricklayers' trowel, and they were putting the dirt away. Let me figure out what to do with that story. And that's the central narrative of Cifra, one of the narrators of Empty Wind. They explained why she was digging. That's on the fictional part of the story, but the image came from a news story. So I'm open to weird news stories. Please send them in. They're all welcome. It's amazing. I would never imagine that this was a news story, actually. Yes, it was, because it's actually this image. It's really strange.
Yeah. Ilaria, in The Secret Lives of Emotions, you write that it took you a long time to understand that being emotional doesn't mean being unstable or unbalanced, or just it means being open to the experiences of the world. You also state that for many women, to be considered as emotional, therefore unstable, is a continuous lack of defranchising in politics and life. And you started writing to undo that knot you had. And this is something you say in The Sacred Lives of Emotions, which is anxiety. That seemed to you to be a weakness. What is the relation in your writing and also in your trajectory between strength and weakness? Thank you. This is a beautiful question for me. It might be just rhetoric, but I believe that the only strength that I might wish to have, the only one, is to accept my weaknesses, which are like cracks that whenever life is hard, open a bit wider. But this is the most important thing to me, that allows me to face this need of having a act of faith, of awareness when facing the world. To write, to me, is to mean I'm very fragile, therefore, if not, I would not be able to write, but I will deliver, give you this frailty. And when you open your frailty to others, it means to give anyone the possibility of answering you with strength. And this is a violence, to respond, to answer, to react violently when someone shows their vulnerability. And the other side of this coin is a form of love and kindness, which doesn't mean that everything I write is just because it is a result of a frailty, or else I would have no resources to write if I didn't feel as imperfect as I am. I would have never started writing. If I were a more unfortunate, unhappy person, I would not have this need to seek happiness. And this doesn't mean that I do not expect to have anything in exchange, something that will be bad for me. It's part of the way you write, to have this. There's this dialogue in Plato that refers to that. And this is something that really moves me, because this is happening in a moment in history where it seemed maybe strange to write, because we're still used to have an oral tradition. And he said, I didn't want to write because of that. And Plato puts in writing a couple of things. And so just to simplify things, he puts in writing some things. And in this dialogue, he says that Socrates says that to write something means to make that rhetoric, that speech, alone in the world, isolated. It will be in the hand of anyone and not by the one who wrote it. And this, for someone that is shy, like me and many others who write, it's amazing, because it's as if you are giving in your greatest weaknesses to someone you don't know. And this is just there alone. You won't be unable to protect it. And this, to me, is very difficult to deal with. In writing courses and workshops, I try to explain this to my students, but it's not easy to understand if you have never been through this. I was only able to understand this when I published my first book. And I wrote it because I really had this entanglement, this knot in my heart that I was unable to breathe until I started writing this story, this novel. When I did write, I felt relief. So in writing, I feel protected. And then when the book is launched, when the book is published, and from that book on, I understood that this would have happened, because once you write, for publishing, there will always be something that you want to keep to yourself. For instance, I wrote a book that will be posthumous because I don't want it to be published as long as I live. I already have a posthumous book. Can you see that? Can you imagine that? But anyways, the other books I write, I know because I really enjoy this feeling of, exchange with my audience. It's interesting what Marcela says, that, send me in stories, Marcela said, because then you create this exchange with your readers. But this frailty I feel in every book, in every writing. I feel disturbed all the time, and I always go back to this frailty, to this weakness. It's the only way I can feel strong. I'm never strong in an aggressive manner or authoritarian way where you sometimes consider what strength is. My only strength is that, and it's, oh my God, it's a lot of work, especially for those who are close to me, but there's no other way I can do this. This is how I go about this. It's as if I have to walk over cinders, walk in fire. I would just like to remind you that we have questions being submitted by the audience, both here as well from the main square. So please send in your questions. And then also the authors will be signing their books at the Flip bookstore. Marcela. I want to ask you a question, but it has to do a little bit with Ilaria's book. Marie France, she owns the store in A Reputação. would always put lemon juice to whiten her skin, and she wanted to hide from the world that she was aging. And I thought about Dulce, Anja's mother, from Nancy Nalgiazas, who knows this recipe very well because she would burn the skin of her black daughter to try to whiten that skin. So not only leaves scars, but will determine the life of this character. Miguel, the old person from Vento Vazio, also has burn marks in his skin, and he also has he's branding his body in other ways. But I don't want to give out any spoilers, so you read it. We're talking about the psychic world here, psychological world, but these superficial scars, which is the beginning of the identity, will certainly contribute for the building of this character. Talk to me a little bit about that.
I believe that our skin is our story. I think it's what we've experienced, what we've suffered, what hurts us on the surface for everybody to see. And that can actually be very painful. It's a exposure. And I believe, and you talked about Marie France, there's an excerpt from Ilaria's book, which is beautiful, which is Barbara, who's the narrator, says precisely, it talks about Marie France and her story, and I'm going to read this excerpt because it helps explain my relationship to skin, which is actually very important. Who knows why, but I had the impression that it was a pretense, that she was perfectly aware of her charisma and was only afraid of acknowledging that, or perhaps hurting herself, as had happened in the past. There are people who take time to heal. I remember when I read that, I was moved because I think that my characters, perhaps they haven't had the opportunity to work through or understand their background to determine how their histories and understand how it's on their skin. But somewhere in their inner being, they know that. They know that the skin carries a lot of stories and its exposure to the world. It exposes them to the world. We should allow the readers to put their finger in that wound or that blister with the yellow pus and approach the characters. But we approach the character, it's almost like physical pain. And this is something that I like to share, this context with the touch, this tactile perception of what is very vulnerable on the outer surface. And it's curious, there's this story, I'm not proud of it, but when I was writing No Sign of Wings, this burn on Anja, this gesture of her mother to put lemon juice on her skin, this burned her skin, severe burns with left scars, and they even determined her future. I put some lemon juice on my own skin, and I went out and took sun. I'm not proud of that experiment, but it went all wrong. Nothing happened. I didn't have any burns. Okay, better that way. 3 days later, I was having I spilled some boiling water. I was making tea, and I spilled boiling water, and there was a little pool of burning, so I had a first and second and third degree burn because of the boiling water when I was making tea. I remember I was writing about a person who had burned skin with my flesh was all red and burned. It was not an ideal situation, but it was important for me because I felt the pain myself in the flesh, and this approached me to Anja that helped me to have her pain perhaps more real and make it more palpable for readers.
I'm going to read an excerpt of Vento Vazio, and then I will have a question for both of you. Do you know that feeling that the tragedy heavy when something very bad is going to happen? This is what the wind farm brought to Capivara. It wasn't fortune. It was and not even the bill, the electricity bill. This wind farm brought something heavy, something weird that I feel every single day. It is Cícera from Vento Vazio who brings this. And she has only one eye, but she's able to see things that go beyond that specific area. She says of our relation with progress and how it will impact us. We can see that the psychological depth doesn't mean an understanding. It has a psychological aspect of how the world impacts us. So I would like to ask you, how will literature dialogue with contemporaneous times? I know you talk about future progress, so I'd like to start with Ilaria, please. Well, to me, it is an honor that Marcela read my book, this book that was just launched by AINE. There are lots of post-its here. I was able to read only a couple of excerpts because I would not risk reading in Portuguese, but my non-existent Portuguese. But still, I can understand a couple of things, so I won't be able to read it, this excerpt. However, I read a couple of things, and your book, I read some excerpts, and I will maybe read later in the Italian translation, hopefully. And I feel that there's something vibrating that has to do also with my book. My characters, who are, ill-adapted to the world with where the world is going. In my book, actually, this is one of the reasons for which maybe I decided to write the story based on that investigation that I was interested in with this fact that happened more than 50 years ago in France, in Orleans, and that I brought it to the past and into the 80s in an imaginary boutique in Rome. So I wrote this book, was placed in the past, and the characters, since they are characters that do not perfectly fit into the world they live in, it is a book that will tell about the difficulty of adapting to that moment of being within the image that others have of us. And it also deals with issues that each one of us have in terms of our skin, which at the same time is the surface through which everything passes, but also the only barrier between us and others' way to see us, and that artificial skin trying to mask us, which is clothing. These are things that will happen and pass. But one of the main topics that made me write has to do with the contemporary aspects of my life and some things that really frighten me. And this has to do with the way that we will convey information and the way we are able to build our notion of reality, believing in things that we don't know to be true. This will talk about libel. This will talk about a fake story that is assembled and prepared around a store. And it has also to do with racial hatred, anti-Semitism, which in this original story from Orleans was present. And in my book, I wanted to revisit with this hatred against different people, which is the case of also of Marcela's characters. And in this story, the most important thing, the most political things I wanted to bring to you as a message, even though I don't like books with a very flat message. I want the message to be articulated and created more as a question. So in what do we believe when someone says something bad to us, when someone, about someone that is close to us? With the ease nowadays of disclosing information about hearsay images that can be modified, that can be more or less real and be taken out of context of how they were conceived, we all have a responsibility over which we do not reflect. The identity, the reputation of a person, this person's reputation, once this person is exposed to what is said about that person, and once you have a way of having conformism and power that will indicate a certain category or a certain person as a target, someone dangerous, to believe in what is said, to disclose this information is a very big responsibility. I don't know about Brazil, but I think that our globalized world is very similar to what happens in Italy. In Italy, there are many news, for instance, the life of youngsters, especially women, but also boys, teenagers, lives destroyed by different ways of disclosing information through bullying, through fake news. through slander, gossip, and people have no limits because their skin is filled with holes whenever fake news is disclosed. So to tell a story of that happens in a analogical world and how a person's ethical values will reflect on how do you dare say something bad about someone I love. In her book, the book about Marie-France, says she's a criminal. There's no proof, but she believes that Marie-France is a criminal. So I wanted to show how difficult, how bothersome, and how a person has the tendency of betraying someone once we receive something burning, such as a fake news, and something that happens at all levels, reputation, individual, political levels, in even a broader sense. And it's even more destructive, potentially. And this is something that we can act without even thinking. Gossip and the analog gossip or slander is something you have to, pick up a phone, talk about something. But today it's just a matter of, sharing a link or sending a photo or maybe a video. In Italy, we talk a lot about the avenge porn. These are intimate pictures that are disclosed without that person's will or approval. So I wanted to work on that. This is something that really is a source of angst to me. So I wanted to show this from a distance with the filter of this narrative, this non-romantic narrative, to show the complexity of these characters. And the characters are all imperfect, like we are. They are unable to react when faced with this violence. And therefore, to me, this book should be something that we use to question things about things of our daily life, of the world, of our existence, that seem to be a bit more difficult to digest, that we have more greater difficulty of accepting, not to bring answers, but to raise questions that can change the way our stance towards the system. So that question will already dislocate your doubt, your certainty, or the things we are afraid of, and your angst. So that's what I mean. It's this relation that will be placed as such in this moment where things just collide.
I think that to write is to look at our time. We have to be alert to what is happening. I don't think that every book needs to be a book of an expose or critique, although literature can do that in a very beautiful way. But I believe in literature for its beauty and fruition. But we are unable, I believe, to write today without showing how the world has affected us. So I think that our discomfort is essential. Our characters have this discomfort, which is a consequence of this contemporaneity, of this pace that capitalism has imposed on us in human relations, increasingly so. This can happen in a big city like Rome, and people are there in a supposed safety in the boutique, or it can happen in this end of the world in the Capivara village with 8 houses and shacks, people totally abandoned, which have their lives devastated by a wind farm, which comes there saying that, claiming to be progress, and it demonstrates in short fashion that that's not the case. So look at today's time is to embrace this discomfort. It's unthinkable to feel comfortable. You can't have characters that are adjusted and accommodated and resigned, that understand what's happening, because you can't understand it. The world today is totally incomprehensible for people who are paying attention to it. That's what I try to put in my books.
Since we talked about this, I'm going to go back to this matter. Those, the clients of the boutiques and the reputation, they look at themselves in the mirror as if within the mirror a stranger was hidden. It is the distance between oneself and oneself, the limits and the failures of your awareness, where you have the different symptoms, or madness, or literature. your characters will leave behind what you considered normal, what we understand as normal, in different moments. At the end of Anja's life, the main character of Nancy Naldiazas, in the crisis of Matilde, of João Maria Matilde, in the different voices of Vento Vazio, in the paranoia that will become part of Barbara's life with all these libel and gossip, and she would herself start seeing weird things that we're not sure if they happen or not, these shadows. Or even in the whole idea of the narrator of following a philosophical school every week in Lições de Felicidade, Lessons on Happiness. Could you talk to us a little bit how your interests came to be in terms of the psyche? But even more so, how this transit between symptoms would be delirium, madness, anxiety that you very carefully write about, or any type of process of becoming mad in fiction. Did you research? I know that Marcela studied with psychiatrists. How was this? How did this happen for you?
I said that we write based on obsessions. I believe that for me, psychological suffering and mental weakness is my greatest obsession. Again, going back to this issue that you can't feel comfortable. It's unthinkable to feel comfortable. This has a huge effect on our psyche. I think that to build characters and craft them that derail from what we call the traditional genre, people who are on the verge or flirt with madness or have several different diagnoses of mental weakness or suffering or distress. It's a way of eliminating stereotypes of sadness. I work with characters that go beyond their diagnosis. Of course, they have generalized anxiety disorder, GAD, depression, but they're much more than their diagnoses. They have other stories to tell. They have layers and layers. They have shrimp allergy. This is important for their lives, so it's a process. They have allergies to shrimp, so this is a rich process and also difficult to put into words, to propose or a kinder view and less stereotypical view of mental distress. João Maria Matilde, the book was well diagnosed in that sense. The characters have their diagnoses and their issues quite clearly. So the process of writing that book took a lot of research. I had consultation with my own psychiatrist to list, okay, what are the main symptoms of these various different disorders? What are the drugs that people take, the medication? Spent hours on end talking to my psychiatrist to be able to design a situation which is as close as possible to reality and which would help me to tell the story of these characters, João Maria and Matilde. For Empty Wind, I tried to bring in this issue of madness, or this borderline issue between madness, the fine line where it is considered normal, and madness in a looser way. So it's the wind that goes crazy. The wind takes its own pace and it touches people differently. So I think that these are manifestations of madness that are quite different from each other and very free-flowing. I didn't have a prior diagnosis for them. Unlike João Maria Matilde, I wanted to bring, say everything is possible. And with that village in Capivara, everything was possible because people are crazy, or maybe they aren't. Perhaps the reader is crazy, perhaps nobody is crazy, but maybe everybody is crazy. But it's something which is a universe which takes hold of us at each turn of the page. And I attempt to do this, of course, in a way that is respectful and sensitive, but I believe that perhaps it's not always possible. The other day I received a testimony from a reader, and she said that she read all of my books and she enjoyed the books, but she was quite emphatic in saying that the way I treated madness, insanity, was not the way madness actually is. She said, your madness is poetic, it's light. That's what madness is. And this really struck me because, in fact, she has a different experience of madness, perhaps a painful and harsh, arid suffering. She had a relationship. We didn't talk about it, the two of us, but madness touched her in a way that perhaps was less literary, so to speak. And it was like these manifestations, they're very different, diverse manifestations, of course, that in the field of fiction, there has to be this space and room for some poetry, for some lightness. But I confess that I was also I wanted to enter into this universe, which perhaps is somewhat uglier and more painful, that of madness itself. This instigated me to do something like that.
I am definitely neurotic. Not psychotic, but neurotic, definitely. If you read my book, The Secret Lives of Emotions, will know that. For instance, in order to have a driver's license, I did the test 6 times, and I still can't drive. I was able to have it for the other 6 times, but I don't drive. I have certain things I'm afraid of, and they never leave me. And I always have this feeling that I am outside of the world because of my neurosis, things that sometimes work with me, but they are difficult. When I was writing my last novel, when I lived in Paris, it was this phase, before I truly started writing this story, I wrote a couple of poems, very bad, very poor poems, I must confess. But I wrote this poem that not only was ugly or bad, it would say something that was truly truth. The truth about the way I felt. It was, I'm gonna recite it anything, but basically you had the eyes of lyric I, me, and people that would come by the street and have the feeling that everybody knew where they were going. I never know where I'm supposed to go. And this, in a certain sense, is as if I had finally access to a different level of feeling, of imagining, and a series of closeness with those that do not know where to go. I always feel that I don't have a true target or a path ahead of me. So to me, it is part as a narrative, as a storyteller, it's a different way of seeing things, a different way to see what is missing in other people, what are other people's gaps that will make that person less efficient, unable to know where to go. But, many years after I wrote that pretty poor poem, I know that even those that seem they know where they're going, sometimes they just don't. In my books, I always say that even in the more essay books that are narratives at the same way, I talk about this blockage, people think, oh, she thought she knew where she was going, but she really didn't. And this is something that is always close to us, this inability of knowing where to go. This has to do with our human nature. It has to do with the fact that we have beautiful ideas. Pascal has beautiful ideas about this, that human beings have unbearable destiny because at the same time we're animals, we are alive. You feel the life as an animal, but then there's a feeling of time, of, the finite nature of time. I don't want to bore you with details about how many authors have referred to this horrible destiny of our nation, but it's something that is ahead of us, something horrible, and how we feel alive, but at the same time, we know that this is limited. Time is limited, so in order not to go mad, we sometimes become mad anyway, so we try to find maybe a solution, a halfway solution, but all my characters are within these types of symptoms, this idea that anyone is within this bigger contradiction. They will try to, in a more or less creative way, for instance, in lessons on happiness, the main character is a nutcase. She said, well, crazy as a horse in Italy, we say. But she has her own way of thinking, but she also has a different neurotic strategy. And it's interesting because it's a creative way of reacting to this difficulty of being in the world that will, of course, impact all of us. Even those who are well within their skin have a certain difficulty at one time or the other. This is why I'm an avid reader of clinical cases, even due to my vocation as a psychoanalyst, which did not fall through. There are many books translated from French with different selections of clinical cases, psychoanalysis, with rivalry between brothers, hypochondriacs. I love reading about these cases and these clinical cases because they allow me to feel part of something bigger. I feel less alone. This is why I always think about my books. And there's also something else, which is a strong link to the idea of philosophy itself. The fact that each person's awareness is built subjectively based on impressions that have nothing objective in it. So we see the same color, but for each one of us, it will have a different meaning, will be a bit different. And this is the reality. This is what reality is. The narratives allows us to explore these differences and understand that these differences we can only welcome them, because if we reject these differences, we'll be forever excluded of the possibility of being in the world, of existing in the world, because we will be submitted to our differences. Even if you don't accept it, they exist. So this is my way of doing it. It's very neurotic, but this is how it is. It is what it is. I would like also to remind you, if you have any questions, please do so from here and also from outside. I know. Please just send in your questions. Oh, here, the questions, they're coming in. Okay, great. So as I organize the questions, I'm going to ask another question to our authors. So to write, and it has to do with what we are saying, it's a way of rationalizing things. However, I understand that literary writing does not happen in a rational level or plan. There's something that we have no control over. I guess everyone who already lost the text and tried to find it again knows, metaphorically of course, knows that you'll change. We are in the same place. 5 minutes later, you lost that idea. You want to write the same thing, you're unable to. True, true. So in your process of writing, how do you bring together what you control and what you don't control? And are you impacted by your own characters? Would you like to start, Ilaria?
I can say that writing is work, in the sense that it's not going to be an inspiration, it's not a light that's going to shine down on you, and the writing comes out spontaneously. Like any work, it benefits from some method, some kind of organization and planning. I am very methodical in my writing at that level, but I believe it's obvious that there's the unknowable, there's something that escapes my hands, and we have to embrace this unknowable, where we no longer know when a character gains force and strength, where the direction of the narrative asks to be changed. This is what's fascinating about writing. That's where art is. Otherwise, if it were just pencil on paper, I think it's amazing and awesome where a character who might be a secondary character is fleshed out and goes crazy, because that's when they become interesting. And I always try to embrace these moments. I think that looking at the characters is what allows us, in my writing process, I like to have coffee with people that write about madness. I think everything is normal to have coffee with their characters and listen to music with them. And that's the moment when the unexpected happens. I think that's when, in these small turning points, these moments where we lose control, because we're talking so much about losing control of not knowing where to go and not understanding the direction that things are taking. Things may make more sense at that moment. For me, the biggest challenge of writing is this balance between what we want to control and what we have rationalized and organized and prepared, in the moment where things escape our control. Okay, the characters wanted to go that direction. I send my characters where they're going, and thus far, I'm clear that I'm the one that writes, but some things actually are asked of me. Little things happen there that we aren't able to understand exactly why, and I think that this is awesome.
I would love to be like Marcela, to have this discipline in time management, which unfortunately I don't have. So objectively speaking, I don't have that. But I do agree fully that, writing is work. And as such, it should be better paid, remunerated, and treated as such, which in Italy not always happens. And this is a serious problem in our cultural world, because it ends up that people that are able to dedicate their time to writing are people that already have other means to exist. They have income. So that's very unfair, because it will create a uniformity that is harmful to literature itself. But having said so, I must say that, unfortunately, I am not in command when I write in a certain phase. In the first phase of creation, I need... I find it embarrassing to write. And this is something that it's as if a vice, maybe just, luxury. So when I always feel guilt, also in writing, when in my free time, but to allow myself to have that space, that time, which of course has to do with economic difficulties I had in the first phases of my life as an author. To allow myself to do so, I have to overcome a certain embarrassment I have, because I feel like an exhibitionist, this challenge in writing. I have to report moments in writing. In the initial phase of my book, I have to take that moment out of my life. So normally the way I manage this relation between control and lack thereof is to punish myself to the fact that I'm doing something that gives me pleasure. I impose myself, for instance, to wake up every day. And I will wake up, I will sit on a sofa with my dog, who of course is still sleeping because of course he's not working. And then in my house in Rome, there's this window that is always lit when I wake up early in the morning. So I have the feeling that I'm not alone, but at the same time I am alone. So I look at my neighbors and I see their kitchens and they're preparing breakfast, I prepare my breakfast, and then I sit down to write. And in that space that I try to steal from my own life, things happen. Things that, of course, I will have management over. I am fixated in languages, for instance. There are certain words that I can't accept. Like people don't like certain smells and flavors. I cannot. There are certain words that I can't stand. I can't even think of them. So my controller side has to do with style. But from the standpoint of content, since I always write a first version in this sort of whimsical way, I allow myself to be guided by something that will sort of nurse me, this feeling that I'm not really awake. When I was a child, when I would play, I will go into the state that I'm trying to describe here. I was not fully guided by logic or rationality. I would love to create relation between my dolls, and they were all different. There was a baby, and the Barbie would be the daughter because she was smaller. And so I would invent stories that had to do with something that is completely irrational. But at the same time, it was as if they were a result of something that I was feeling. As if when we dream about something specific, even though it seemed not to have anything to do with our lives. So I live the first form of writing. That's how I live it. And in a semi-aware way. And then I go mad. Because I can't understand no longer where I'm at. These are sort of obscure things, and since I have to do the whole work all over again, this then is a lot of work. So we are reaching the final moments of our roundtable, because I could sit here and listen to them for hours and hours. It's wonderful to talk to all of you. And I would like to ask you a question and bring something from Bruna Mitrano, the poet who was here earlier this morning. She said that she believes in the transformation power of literature, and those that do not believe in it probably or possibly don't want the transformation to actually happen. So I ask you if this transformation has to do not necessarily in the world, but maybe can this just be personal in your psyche? If you believe that reading or writing, these two sides of literature, if it can be therapeutic.
I think a little about what Matilde said once, Matilde's Campilho, sometimes literature and poetry are not going to save the world, but can save a minute. And if you save a minute, it's already been worth it. So I believe in this kind of transformation. As authors, we can use literature to have a kinder view of ourselves, of our own issues and our own guilt and our complexities and contradictions. So I believe that in a sense, there's a kind of saving in this process of being kinder to ourselves and to others as well, to work with these things that are so strange and so unlikely and sometimes so uncomfortable to look at, allows us to embrace ourselves in terms of our own strangeness and complexity. So, but again, I go back to the issue of literature for its beauty. If beauty doesn't save the world, what is going to save the world? So I agree with Bruna Mitrano. Amazing. She said beautiful things this morning. Indeed, we can use literature to save ourselves and to save others and to save us as a collective.
Sì, io sono d'accordissimo con questa cosa.
I fully agree with Marcela said. To me, this is how it happens. It is to transform. The word itself is transformative from the moment it becomes a communication, from the moment that someone says something. And my books talk about this or refer to this. There are certain words, and not every transformation is positive, of course, but the availability to allow yourself to change, to allow yourself to transform, will result in something positive. Because to me, there is a good literature and bad literature. The Madame Bovary, for instance, is an example of what bad literature can do. But this availability for this transformation is something that all of us have and that we should care for. I believe that today is just it's also a political issue, because what happens in the world, and I say this as an Italian, the fact that there is this moment in which, very strict right-wing people, once they understand that they're very successful politically, has to do with fear. Instead of allowing themselves to transform or to model or to be more flexible, then like what happens with rocks, with stones that will be eroded by different nature elements. And this is something beautiful. This is something that life does. Emotions, words are able to do. Beautiful things that happen can allow this to happen. So to be malleable, to be flexible, and this softness when facing others, literature when it's good, especially if we learn it during a certain phase of life when we're still malleable and flexible, will certainly bring positive results in the sense. Of course, it can save. It can save because it is a fully rigid object will break easily when under pressure. So a soft, malleable object that became beautiful because it allowed itself to be sculpted by life, and what resists in time is important. And good literature does exactly that. Just to conclude, I would like to bring a question from the audience. from Renato Fiorenzano. And if you could maybe answer in a nutshell, because it's a question about the end, and we will conclude this. What is the emotion of the end of a story? How are we able to know that the story has reached its end? Maybe a love story. A love story? It could be a love story or whatever story. Your book, for instance, when you reach the end of a book. Well, I think that story ends when you start dreaming about it. And I can say this as a writer. I reach the end of my book when I start dreaming about it. In my dreams, I feel that there is a distance between myself and the dream. And this also happens with love stories. It's the same thing. I start having dreams in which I feel that sort of solitude. And that's a sign that the story has ended.
Okay, I have a more pragmatic view about when, for me, the story comes to an end when the publisher says that I have to send him the book, the draft. Otherwise, I would continue. There's always something more to change, something to improve, and fiddle with. So it's a difficult moment. I can't open up the book after it's ready in print because I always see that there's something to include more things into the story. And I understand you totally, because now our time is up and this roundtable has come to an end. All good things come to an end after all.